history of IMEC to G20, where India successfully launched this project or talked about this project. But there are certain dots which takes us back further, and some take it to the Abraham Accord of 1920 when Donald Trump was there in his first term. So probably this, if IMEC takes shape in this term of President Trump, this might be part of his legacy of his first tenure. Can we make this happen during his second term? And in the past, we all have seen that how the corridors have shaped the way we do trade, the way we do businesses. Can IMEC be a stepping stone of getting into a different zone where the democracies would be defining the way the trade is happening? So we have with us Dr. Arvind Gupta. He had to return back. He will be joining us through the web link. Dr. Seshadri Chari, Professor Emeritus, Savitribai, Phule, Pune University, member governing board of RIS, and a very renowned thinker. Mr. Ashley Tellis, he is Tata Chair for Strategic Affairs at Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, USA. He is joining us from DC. Mr. Kapil Sharma, he is non-resident fellow at Atlantic Council. He has specially come from DC to be part of the conversation. Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee. She is former ambassador of India to various European countries, including Netherlands. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Kapil Sharma for you. Welcome, Kapil. Ashley has joined us from DC. Very good morning, Ashley. And Dr. Ashley, you're on mute.
Well, good evening to you, and thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm passing on the mic to the moderator of this evening, Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee. She is former ambassador of India to the Netherlands. Ma'am, mic is yours. Mr. Gupta has joined from the web link. He had some issues, so he had to step back.
Thank you very much. I'd first like to thank the Director General RIS for asking me to moderate a session in which I didn't know the topic or who was speaking till I reached here 45 minutes ago. So please do excuse me for any shortcomings in my presentation, if at all. But I have a very distinguished panel. I'd like to first begin by saying that in my perspective, the topic which is tracing the roots, connecting the dots of the Abraham Accords, I2U2 and IMEC, is extremely important in the context of the present troubled global political scenario and economic scenario. And when the Honorable Prime Minister during the G20, along with the US President and others, proclaimed this IMEC, it was a different world because nobody thought at that time that there would be this seemingly intractable conflict which would break out in the Middle East and which would put a break actually to the increasing warmth between Israel and some of the important Middle East players, and which would have facilitated actually a quicker, faster implementation of IMEC, something that is very important to India historically and something that is very important economically to connect Asia, Middle East and Europe. The fallback position as a professional diplomat to me is the Eastern Corridor, which is to establish India and Middle East, that is to say the UAE and Saudi Arabia, while we try to get back things in shape, hopefully. On the other hand, it's also interesting to note that the Abraham Accords was the legacy of Trump 1.0, and are we then going to see IMEC, as just been explained in the earlier session, as a legacy of Trump 2.0, at a time when there seems to be a huge conflict brewing between the world's two largest economies, and at a time when India seems to have been able to, through quiet, effective diplomacy and the excellent relationship that our Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji has with the US President, been able to somehow navigate a safer route for India in the troubled and turbulent oceans and seas in front of us. Having said that, I'd like to give the floor to the first speaker. That is my colleague and friend from the Foreign Service, Dr. Arvind Gupta. I'm sorry, Arvind, that you're not feeling well. He's the director of the Vivekananda International Foundation. And unlike me, Arvind is an expert on everything. So he doesn't need any preparation to speak on anything. Arvind, you have the floor.
Can you hear me? Yes. Am I audible?
We can hear you. We
Yes.
can hear you.
Okay. So thank you, Bhaswati, for that tongue-in-cheek introduction, but I welcome that. And I'm sorry that I could not join earlier. So let me just begin by saying that I agree with your, the sum up that you have given, the opening remarks of the geopolitical situation. The IMEC was a wonderful, is a wonderful initiative. It is one of the most strategically thought out initiative. It would have probably countered BRI, and it is also in a way restores India's ancient connectivity with the Roman Empire through the Arab world. So there is a lot of thought that has gone behind it. But as you said, today we have a massive geopolitical churn that is underway, and it has created huge uncertainty and volatility in practically every aspect of international relations. So we'll have to see how IMEC, which is very much there, and perhaps right now it is at a pause, how it develops. But IMEC has two distinct segments. One is the Eastern Corridor, which joins India with the UAE, and then the Northern Corridor, which goes through Saudi Arabia, Israel, Jordan, and onto Jordan, Israel, and onto Europe. So probably it will take a while before we come back to a situation where actually the investments will be made by the investors when the geopolitical situation calms down. But right now, the Middle East is in a great churn, and we don't know what is going to happen. Abraham Accord, it is quite possible, as some analysts have said, that it was perhaps IMEC which could have been a trigger for the Hamas attacks in October, and that led to so many other things. I don't have to talk about those. So the situation is very, very volatile at this point of time. So we'll have to see how such massive investments can come in at a time when there is a geopolitical uncertainty. So that is the one point that I want to make. The second is I was listening to an earlier panel when I actually did come to the hall and I had to leave. There they were talking about the financing prospects of for the IMEC projects, etc. I think they were talking more about generally about infrastructure funding, and it was underlined that today India is much better placed in finding funds for infrastructure development, etc. But here we are talking about investments in geopolitically uncertain and volatile areas. So that's a entirely different ballgame. And I just want to mention in the last, in my opening remarks, just to mention one point, and which is that, we have had investments in Chabahar, in Iran, which is also a area in the Middle East, for some time now. But if you look at our record, out of about $86 million investment that we had promised, we have not yet been able to reach the target, and it is still much below that $86 million potential. And again, several factors are important. So we have to see what has been our record in investing, and it is basically because of the lot of geopolitical factors. Then we also have been, associated with the INSTC, which is another very big connectivity project which passes through Iran. And this has been under the works for almost about 20 years or 20 years plus. And there again, part of it is being held up because there is some investment in some sections of Iran, Azerbaijan, Russia segment, and some infrastructure has not yet been made because of again several factors. So I think when we talk about IMEC, we'll have to really look at the geopolitical risks. But as I said, the project is very strategic, and I think we should remain associated with it and have some patience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arvind, for connecting those dots and for underlining the strategic initiative which we all thought at the time of G20 would be a perfect counter to the BRI. But we can still, as you rightly pointed out, utilize the Eastern Corridor first and see how we can progress during these turbulent times. So thank you so much for joining us, even though you're not feeling well. And I have the great pleasure to give the floor to Dr. Seshadri Chari, Professor Emeritus, Savitribai, Pune University, and member, Governing Board and Governing Council, RIS. So you have the floor.
Thank you, Bhaswati ji. I would rather take off from where Mr. Arvind Gupta left out. Of course, this whole idea is a very unique model of transport and trade. So I think what basically IMEC is going to do is reshape the international trade paradigm and create new partnerships, as what he explained. So in this new partnership, these three elements, that is the Abraham Accord, the I2U2, and IMEC itself, these are the three important pillars. So what began in August 2020, the Abraham Accord was signed, that laid the foundation for I2U2, which followed after almost 2 years, that is July 2022. So the first meeting was held in July 2022, which actually took the idea of Abraham Accord a little further. And then in September 2023, 1 year almost, a few months later, the idea of IMEC was unveiled. So actually, if you see this, beginning from Abraham Accord to the announcement of IMEC, it has been a very gradual unfoldment of a new idea. So what actually we are seeing out of this idea is a new value chain mechanism being developed. So that is what is going to actually happen in the next few years when the idea of IMEC really materializes. And this value chain mechanism, which will be practically a new one to be created, will it will result in a massive metamorphosis of innovation, manufacturing, production, infrastructure, transport, IT, and several other activities, resulting in a massive cooperative framework. And this massive cooperative framework will again have a very unique feature, which actually goes with India's idea of the emerging world order. We have been looking at a bipolarity, and from there to unipolarity, and then now we are talking of the rise of middle powers. And not only rise of middle powers, but also economic segments, what we call emerging economies. So these emerging economies are actually regional forces. So IMEC would actually be connecting these regional forces. And what India believes that the coming years are going to be multilateral years. So this multilateralism will be actually reflected through IMEC, and that is where the Abraham Accord, I2U2 and IMEC gets connected. But in this, the most important element that we should not forget is before IMEC, there have been different kinds of attempts. One was, of course, we all know about the Build Back Better World, which practically was a non-starter. Then the Global Gateway, that idea of Global Gateway came, that was also a non-starter. BRI, of course, much needs to be analyzed, but the initial euphoria about BRI is slowly waning. So many countries are now feeling the pinch of BRI rather than getting the benefit of BRI. And BRI is basically neither a bilateral program nor a multilateral program. It's a unilateral program of one single country. And then we also know about the Blue Dot network. All these ideas failed. And the unique feature in these 4 ideas, or even the fifth idea, is that none of them includes India. That is one of the reasons for the failure of these projects. Now, India becomes the most important element, a bridge between 2 quads, the I2U2 quad in the Western Hemisphere and the Indo-Pacific quad in the Eastern Hemisphere. So now these 2 quads will have to work together, and the success of these 2 quads depends on how India manages the situation. So that is where I think the most important element about India comes, and that is where the challenges also comes. So India will have to prepare itself for the coming days. We will have to improve the quality of production. We may have to go in for a massive automation of the industry. We may have to restructure some of our economic policies to suit the ongoing issues. And we will also have to think in terms of how to reduce conflicts. Because as you very rightly said, conflicts are the most important elements that are roadblocks in this whole program. So these are the challenges, these are the opportunities. How India plays the cards in the future is going to be more important as far as a link between these 2 quads are concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that outstanding presentation and for underlining the importance of India being a bridge between I2U2 and IMEC. I may add that one of the most important differences between China's BRI and India's entire approach, for instance, to development cooperation in Africa, my colleague Dr. Meenakshi Lekhi is also here, she was our minister, and she would tell us that in Africa, for instance, we have brought development to Africa for Africa, and we have brought sustainable development to Africa, whereas the Chinese approach is totally different. It is development for China. So China looks at Africa with a neo-imperialist vision, which we don't do. So these are very important points that you've brought out. Thank you so much. I have now the great pleasure of requesting Mr. Ashley Tellis, Tata Chair for Strategic Affairs, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, who is online from US, and we apologize for keeping you waiting. You have the floor, sir. We look forward to hearing from you.
Well, thank you, Bhaswati. It's great to be here with actually friends on the panel whom I've known for many years. Seshadri, Arvind, going back almost 3 decades now, and Kapil. Let me make 3 or 4 points to start. And I'm going to speak from a US perspective just so that you get a sense of what the calculations in Washington underlying this entire project, the linkages between the Abraham Accords, the I2U2 and the IMEC are. So the first point I want to make is that this ambition was driven fundamentally by the imperatives of geopolitics. And the geopolitical imperative really was rooted in a US ambition to reconstitute the entire greater Middle East with the aim of enhancing Israeli security. Israeli security has been a cornerstone of US regional policy going back to the foundation of the State of Israel. And what the Trump administration did in its first term, very boldly, was to try and engineer a rapprochement between Israel and key Arab states. And that was the core of the Abraham Accords. The idea was that the old efforts at engineering this rapprochement through collective solutions had sort of reached the limits of its success. And therefore, the Trump administration doubled down essentially on various forms of bilateralism. And so we saw the initial accords between Israel and the UAE, Israel and Bahrain, even Israel and Sudan, all designed to essentially reach the prize. And what was the prize? The prize was to get the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to eventually recognize Israel as a legitimate state. And that would lay the foundations for this grand vision where the United States would have made this contribution to enhancing Israeli security, building new bridges with the Arab world, and then opening the door for various kinds of both geopolitical and geoeconomic realignments. So that was the underlying vision that drove the Abrahamic Accords, upon which the I2U2 and the IMEC eventually were erected by the successor to the Trump administration, which was the Biden administration. Point number two, this vision in the area of economics was driven by the political conviction that it served US and regional interests to increase resiliency by building alternatives to the Suez route. Now, clearly, the China BRI program was in the peripheral vision of the United States, but I would say it was not necessarily the most important driver. It was definitely a benefit if we could outflank BRI through alternative arrangements. But I think there was a conviction that given the sheer geography of the Suez Canal and given the volume of trade that moves both through the Suez Canal and through the Persian Gulf, both with respect to energy and merchandise trade, the global system would be better off if there were alternative infrastructure patterns that were created. And so the Biden administration in particular built on Trump's Abraham Accord achievement to really double down on partners with India and forge the foundations for these new alternative infrastructure corridors that was envisaged as really building resiliency. And remember, the Biden administration was very hot on resiliency as a general rule. It pushed in a variety of areas, semiconductors, so on and so forth, in ways that its predecessor did not even attempt to do. So the objective of resilience was very much part of the US calculation. Point number three, the goals of restructuring the Middle East and the goals of resilience were grounded on a huge assumption. And that huge assumption was that there would be a durable peace in the greater Middle East. In fact, the whole Abrahamic Accord was designed to lay the foundations for that peace. If you take away the assumption of peace, then the entire edifice of restructuring and resiliency essentially comes about. And I think one can make a persuasive case that the vulnerability of the strategy was the failure to take into account the real grievances that existed with regard to the Palestinian cause. And it really exhibited the tension in the US strategy. The tension in the US strategy was to enhance Israel's security by supporting Israel's policy. And Israel's policy was aimed at consolidating its own local hegemony and essentially marginalizing the Palestinian cause, which was a strategy that would have succeeded if it wasn't for the events of October 7th and the aftermath. And so now we have ended up in a very difficult position because the Israeli campaign, which has been remarkably successful in purely military terms against both Hamas and Hezbollah, has, of course, cemented Israeli hegemony, at least for the moment, in the Middle East. It has marginalized key competitors like Iran, but it has not essentially extinguished the Palestinian grievances against Israel. If anything, it has intensified those. And the problem with the persistence of an unaddressed Palestinian grievance is that it makes it very difficult for the United States and for Israel to recover that grand prize, which is securing Saudi acquiescence to normalization with Israel. And if we cannot secure Saudi acquiescence to normalization, it is very hard to bring the entirety of the GCC world, with the exception, of course, of the UAE and Bahrain, to the table where you can have a modicum of stability. Right now, the United States is sort of reeling from the consequences of the October 7 attacks. There is no clear roadmap for what one needs to do with respect to encouraging normalcy. And my suspicion is that the Trump administration's instincts, especially in the second term, will be to double down on reinforcing Benjamin Netanyahu's agenda in the greater Middle East, which could potentially lead to future confrontations with Iran. And if those confrontations actually come to pass, God forbid, then we are looking at a huge conflagration that is going to put paid to all these grand ideas like IMEC and I2U2. And I think this is the reality that we simply have to accept, because it is a reality that simply does not admit of easy solutions. And so while it is important for us to think of the opportunities that IMEC and I2U2 represent for India, for the United States, for Israel, for the Arab partners, the fact of the matter is that at the moment, it really looks elusive. It looks elusive because the geopolitical foundations on which this entire economic edifice was supposed to be grounded, those geopolitical foundations have essentially collapsed. And until one finds ways of restoring those foundations, I think we are going to have a very, very hard time in bringing this grand vision of an alternative infrastructure corridor that links the subcontinent to the Middle East, to Europe, and eventually to the United States. We're going to have a very hard time bringing that to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that sober, pragmatic, and realistic analysis, underlining that the original policy of the United States, which was to secure Israeli security and to get Saudi Arabia to recognize Israel, was based on the fundamental premise that there would be peace in the Middle East. And there are many conspiracy theories, including the one which says that the attack by Hamas actually was perhaps one of the reasons due, apart from Israeli intransigence, etc., could be the prospect of IMEC, the gradual getting together of the Israel's former enemies into an economic and political system, which would be a great setback to an organization which is recognized today. I consider it to be a terrorist organization, Hamas, the way it's behaved, though of course there are many issues there which we don't want to get into. But you've also talked about the vulnerability, and that is very true. The vulnerability is the underpinning of peace, which cannot be guaranteed, and if that peace cannot be guaranteed, then the entire connecting the dots will just remain dots until that vulnerability is addressed. So it's a very important point you made. I have great pleasure in passing the floor to Mr. Kapil Sharma, non-resident senior fellow, Atlantic Council, USA. Do you have a mic, or shall I? You have a mic. You have the floor.
Thank you. And first of all, I want to thank all of you for inviting me to speak very quickly now because time is up, but I will try to summarize my points very quickly. To your earlier point where you said about whether IMEC will be a part of Trump's legacy, I think at this time the answer will be no. I do not think that the Trump administration is going to take IMEC that seriously. because I think the administration has made it very clear that it wants to see a direct U.S. benefit for its interests. The difference between IMEC and I2U2 is that in I2U2, the United States is directly involved. In IMEC, the United States has got more of a convening role. And for the Trump administration, what they want to see is more money come into their treasury and more exports go out. And it's unclear for them at this point, I think, to see how does IMEC actually do that. I was taken aback by this morning when I was listening to all the other panelists talk about the benefit of IMEC. And one way of maybe irritating the Trump administration was talking about how IMEC is going to benefit Europe. And if you look at who is the United States' biggest competitor right now, when it comes to economic growth, it'll be China and Europe. So if I am sitting in the Trump administration, am I thinking, well, if I facilitate IMEC, and I see IMEC reach its goals, am I making Europe stronger and not to the benefit of the United States? So I would say at this point, I do not see the administration getting fully behind IMEC, but around maybe I2U2. And the reason being about I2U2, it's very narrow, it's generally defined in areas of cooperation, where, like I said before, IMEC is a bit more complicated, its immediate benefits are not as defined, and interesting enough, IMEC doesn't include Israel, and again, like I said before, the connect to the United States is very vague. But very quickly, I think there are 6 points in which I think that if we can see and focus on I2U2, that could lead to the benefit of IMEC. One is strategic vision, because as everybody's been talking about, including Ashley, which is that the region is a geopolitical mess. So successful implementation of I2U2 will set the tone for the successful implementation of IMEC. I think everybody in the region needs to learn how to work with Israel. It is going to be very difficult. As I'm studying and learning more about this issue, the region, the Gulf region, doesn't really trade with each other. They actually don't know how to work with each other, let alone with Israel. What I2U2 can do is it can start finding areas of commonality between Israel and the other Gulf countries, which I think is very important for IMEC to succeed. I think that also I2U2 can teach all of the players in the region how to scale green energy. Right now we talk a lot. Everybody was talking today about green hydrogen. Green hydrogen, green hydrogen, green hydrogen. But I don't know if anybody knows how to scale it. And scale it in an economic way in which you want to get private investments in. So a successful scaling of green hydrogen with I2U2 can be the model for IMEC to succeed. 4, I think private capital is very important. I know that we've been spending a lot of time talking about how we're going to fund IMEC. My understanding was that when they put IMEC together, it was going to be up to each country to figure out how to finance their own infrastructure and their own internal needs. So there wasn't going to be any real multilateral financing that needed to take place. But where we can see some benefit from I2U2 is if we could see some private sector money, capital coming in. That's scalable. If I2U2 can succeed, you can then encourage more private capital to go into IMEC. Very 2 quick ones. Regulatory reform, the last panel talked about it. I think that is a very understated issue right now that nobody really focuses on, which is how are you going to get regulatory harmonization between 8 to 9 countries. I think it's much harder than what people think. And the most important part is if the Trump administration doesn't take interest in IMEC and seeing its completion, who takes the leadership role? One of the benefits of the United States has been its convening power, the ability to get all the players to the table. If the Trump administration says, okay, we're not going to be putting too much time and effort into this, a lot of people don't realize this, but IMEC doesn't even have a home in the administration, Trump administration right now. That tells you its areas of importance. Does that mean now India has to step up and serve that convening role? Is India prepared to serve that convening role? So these are some of the things. I think maybe if we can see more advancement in I2U2, because right now I would challenge anybody to tell me that I2U2 is a success. It's got good bones, but there's no meat on those bones. So maybe this is where India can step up, push I2U2, see greater advancement in it, which can then set the tone for IMEC. Thank you.
Thank you very much for underlining that, in a way, I would say what you've noted is that I2U2 was the product of Trump 1.0. IMEC was the product of Biden. Could that be a reason why the Americans, the present American administration, would prefer to build up I2U2 and, as an earlier speaker had said, to talk of two quads, that is one quad, that is I2U2, and the second quad, which is the quad of the Indo-Pacific. From India's perspective, yes, we can certainly be a bridge, but we can certainly also try to build up IMEC, because IMEC actually does solve a lot of regional interests, and when it was announced in the G20, certainly Israel was supposed to be an important part of IMEC, but because of what Hamas did with its attack, the entire politics of the Middle East went up for, it's been saying time's up since the time you started talking, so I apologize. It shows that we can't really depend on technology all the time. But thank you all very much. Since it says time's up, I won't ask for any questions from the audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee. Wonderful conversation, and I'm sure there is a conclave 2026 which would be happening, and many of the conversation we will be taking further up. May I now request Mrs. Meenakshi Lekhi to please come forward and help us in felicitating the speakers and the moderator. I want to thank Ashley Tellis and Dr. Arvind Gupta, who have remotely joined us. Mrs. Meenakshi Lekhi, country's former MOS for External Affairs. And she's also part of CIEU's governing board. Seshadri Chari ji, Cap Sharma. Thank you, Kapil. Thank you very much. He specially traveled from Washington, D.C. to be part of the conference. We really appreciate that the speakers have taken their time out and given us a really good insight. So let's proceed further, gazing future, finding a